Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Fusion Strike, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we're going to be looking at one of the most interesting basic V Pokemon that we're getting out of the Brilliant Stars set. It's going to be Entei V. Yes, this is a spiritual reprint to a Suicune that we are fully aware of what it's capable of in the format. It's been performing very well with a variety of builds, with Ludicolo, with like Hammers and Disruption, as well as with Ice Rider. And I believe Entei is also one of these Pokemon that we can easily unlock in a number of different ways. So today we're going to be looking at a bit of a type coverage toolbox with Entei at the center of it. And the basic concept really is that Entei, as we already know from Suicune, is a very, very strong card with its ability to draw extra cards throughout the game is never a bad thing. The Burning Rondo is just very good, efficient damage, especially in a format where many archetypes are forced to go wide on the board. If they're playing Inteleon engines themselves, if they're playing, if it's Genesect Mew, they are forced to go wide very often for their own engine. It's very difficult for many archetypes to be able to do much without going wide. So Burning Rondo is doing a ton of damage. Naturally, this is improved even more by Choice Belt as well. It's even more difficult for your opponent to play out of your damage range, or at least knocking out two prize V Pokemon can be pretty easy with that Burning Rondo. And this can be done pretty consistently on turn one if you're the player going second, only needing Basin, discard of a fire, and then turn attach of any energy, and getting Entei into the active. It's a few hoops to jump through, but unlike Suicune, where you are limited to a Melanie, we're allowed to research, and that gives us a ton of options, a ton of cards to see throughout the game. Ultimately, on that first turn, we see a ton of cards, and it gives us extra discard synergy now with Ultra Ball, as well as Quick Ball. There's a lot of ways to activate this Basin in the early stages. And Crobat also is a much better card in terms of drawing in this new format. It was always a decent sort of get-out-of-jail-free option here and there, but now we have double the outs to find it with Ball Search on the first turn. It means it's pretty reliable of actually getting onto that board, and also Ultra Ball thins the hand more than ever, so Crobat's physically drawing more cards as we thin through the hand as quickly as possible. So, the combination of Ultra Ball and, to an extent, Lumineon coming out ultimately makes this, very basic V-focused draw engine work quite nicely, where we just have Lumineon, Eldegoss, Crobat in our favor, knowing that any ball search throughout the game is going to be tremendous value, either for getting our next attackers lined up, but also getting these great abilities online quickly. And it means that we can have that explosive turn one going second, which, at the moment in the format, we only really see that out of Mew, really, where it has the Sparkle plays turn one. And there are some, one prize attacking threats that can come in and deal like 90 or so damage, which is okay into single prizes, but Entei has that genuine presence of being able to KO things on turn two, with enough draw to actually back that up and make it, fairly frequent, which I think is really, really strong, and really speeds up the tempo of games, and you really represent a lot of pressure with this archetype. And then in this instance, we're going to have the fallback of the Galarian Birds to have some extra energy acceleration around the board, so we're continuing to have multiple threats because Moltres is self-accelerating, of course, and also Galarian Zapdos is a very, very strong one-energy attacker in this format, where now with Choice Belt, your damage is modified to be much better at being a one-energy attachment sort of gust Pokemon, where you can be knocking out, well, already Lumineon with that 170, Crobat as a weakness, but now Choice Belt can put you into range of knocking out things like Genesect, which is really important. We are playing Zigzagoon, so you can Zig, Choice Belt, and KO a Mew in certain instances, because they do have a -30 resistance. And of course, you are now hitting for additional weaknesses in the format. It's already decent into Jolteon, of course, and we are contesting the Stadium War with a full 4 count of Basin, of course. But also, there's an Arceus V-Star coming out from the set, so fighting type coverage is looking pretty juicy. And of course, there's Gengar as well, so Zapdos hits a lot of the formats. Moltres is really good into Mew, which is obviously a matchup that's always keen on our minds. And Entei basically just comes out the gate swinging, and if you're ahead in a prize race, there's not much that can punish you in this format from just sort of getting ahead and staying ahead. So excellent value coming out of this card, and we're also showing off this new sort of basic engine. So here is the full list, thanks to PokeGear.app, where I have put in the images and been able to show this list in a pretty concise and easy manner, but there's a lot to manage here. So we'll talk about the Pokemon first. So we've just talked about Entei and what it represents. Normally this is like your go-to early game option, but you actually can turn 1 attack with Moltres and Zapdos as well. So they are all turn 1 attacking threats. They're just jumping through a few more hoops than Entei. Obviously Zapdos has to be paired most likely with an E-Search to actually get our 2 of energy. But we do have Mew in here that can make those E-Searches pretty live pretty often. And of course the opponent can play around Zapdos's fighting instinct. It's down to them to have gone first and got lots of these into play, which will happen a good amount of games, but not all the time. Moltres you can attack with turn 1. If you Basin an Entei or a Moltres, then hit your 1 of E-Switch, which is really low odds, as well as having Dire Flame Wings turn attach. That's very, very narrow. But Entei is your most likely contender here, where you simply need to discard a Fire Energy, Basin, attach that energy to the benched Entei, then manually attach any of the energy that you have and get into the active position. And we play a ton of switch outs, as you can see here. We have ropes, switches, and air balloons to try and get into that active position with Entei quickly. We also have a scoop up net if we happen to start with some of our single prize Pokemon, which are also very important in this deck. And it means that Entei is swinging. And like I said, it is a few combination pieces here and there. But you do have the Crobats, the huge amount of ball search, and you have the license to research turn 1, which is really nice. And again, you can use Lumineon to access that research turn 1 very consistently. And we are playing maximum copies as well. So yeah, it's actually pretty reliable of getting those early attacks off with Entei, despite it looking like a bit of a mess right now with only 4 fire energy. It kind of looks cringe on the surface, but you also have the E-Searches, so that's 7 immediate outs. And then you have the additional outs of whenever you get into Mew, you have Mysterious Tail digging into the top 6 cards to hit Energy Search to then find your fire. So it's actually more consistent than it looks on paper. And at first glance, it looks very awkward, but it actually pays off like pretty reasonably. And these low energy counts aren't too shabby. You're always happy to discard additional dark energy because of Dire Flame Wings, of course. Any of them hitting the discard pile then allows them to be accessed again via Raihan. So whenever, you know, a Zapdos is the most useful target, just finding one fighting is great, because even if a Zapdos is KO'd, then you can immediately Raihan to the next one, which is fantastic for you. And yeah, you love seeing fire and dark in the discard pile at the same time, because it's great for Basin, it's great for Dire Flame Wings. So we are really trying to have energy sort of flooded around the place so that we have constant attacking pressure throughout the game. The E-Switch is a little bit of extra help here. It means that even if you're whiffing the Basin, you can discard a Dark, get down a Moltres, and find an E-Switch attach play to Entei. I really want to find space for a second E-Switch, honestly, but the list actually is kind of tight because we're trying to be a toolbox naturally. But double E-Switch does make the Entei even more consistent, and what's super important about this means of getting an Entei attacking turn 1 is that you are not damaging yourself, and that's actually really important into some Arceus matchups, where you can try and initiate that prize race and sit there with 230 hit points, which then means the Arceus player can't use double turbo energy if they want to knock out that Entei. They have to try and find alternate means of actually finding 3 energy to attack with their Arceus with, as well as finding the choice belt themselves. So yeah, that Entei option via E-Switch is really cool. I really like the one of just in general. It gets me out of awkward spots here and there, especially if you're spending manual attachments on sort of suboptimal targets. You can E-Switch later on in the game, and it is Mew searchable, so it's pretty reliable alongside the double Raihan here. So it is kind of a package going on altogether. We have the Moltres, which can do a 1 for 90 with the Basin. Really nice into decks that are trying to shove 1 prizes into the active position on those opening turns. It can, of course, deal with Meloetta, which is nice. It can deal with Sobbles, Houndours, Drizzars, all those sorts of things. What am I saying? Mincinos, all of those little basics that get thrown into the active position. We are also playing that double rope, and again, with Mew helping scout these out, it gives you some decent potential to just push something aside on that opening turn, and hopefully it then allows you to knock out, you know, the 2 prizes that they've left on the bench instead, because it will be very often where in this format, if the opponent is playing 1 and 2 prize decks, they will try and leave a 1 prizer in the active position if they are the player going first, especially against, you know, the likes of Mew and stuff like that. It's super important because Mew is left to Sparkle attach, right? So they can't boss turn 1. And this is a similar deck where you're likely, unless you really high roll and are able to hit the Basin combos off of a bat play, you're unlikely to be able to boss. So the rope sometimes comes in as that pseudo pressure play, which I think is really nice, and it can help push aside some of those higher hit point threshold Pokemon, and it helps you just sort of have that ignore game plan and take alternate prize routes, which I think is really cool here and there. The Mew is actually like really good. I think it's a thing that stitches together this sort of low maintenance engine very nicely, because it just gives you extra outs to hit these ball search cards, which are your all-star cards really. They're getting you your attackers, they're getting you discard synergy for dark and fire energy, and they're getting you into some amazing effects for coming into play, which is just awesome. And at the same time, it's helping you piece together some kind of cheeky combo pieces, whether it's switching outs, whether it's getting like a Zig net play going on here, whether it's getting Choice Belt for additional damage. There's lots going on. I really like the Zigzagoon. I've already mentioned how it's nice for the Zapdos to be able to knock out Mews alongside Choice Belt. It's also pretty handy here and there on Entei, because of course you're on odd numbers. Oh, sorry, you're on even numbers with the Rondo. Sometimes your opponent will sort of calc out your damage range, but having the Zigzagoon ping to push you over is going to be really nice for reaching some KOs, and it's obviously much more searchable than the Choice Belt itself, although both are going to do a really good job of making sure Entei is putting on a ton of pressure. So also a nice one-off to have here. And I like the critical mass of having 4 one-prize Pokemon just in general, so that if you are the one going first, you can be the person to throw a one-prize Pokemon into the active as a punching bag, so it doesn't affect the prize race all that often, where you simply don't put any other one-prize Pokemon into play and just feed them your attackers, essentially, for the remainder of the game, which is kind of the idea that you want to do to try and buy back a turn off of opponents, essentially. So that's really nice. It also means that you can put 2 down in a game, where you can even play around Escape Rope, knowing that you have the net still in the deck at some point. So it's not only good for Zigzagoon, it's also good for resetting a Mysterious Tail, giving you an extra switch out in that instance, but also allowing you to play around Rope in the early game, knowing that then you can net up your second one prizer if one is getting KO'd. So that's also a really nice niche thing. So even though it looks kind of wacky to have just one net in here, it serves like a lot of purpose, just like the E-switch. Even though it's a 1 count, it's super important. Then you have the bats, Lumineon, Eldegoss. They kind of speak for themselves. Those unfamiliar with Lumineon, it's able to come into play and search straight away for a supporter card. It means we can go very skimpy on the supporter counts, but still have really high odds of getting our ideal supporter, because we have the 8 ball search cards, the physical Lumineon, the double Crobat, like the 4 research and the Marnie turn 1. That's like a huge amount of outs to actually get rolling in the game. So you're already just starting out with a brick altogether, and we also have a really high amount of like decent leads in the deck, so you don't have to worry too much about starting these chaps. Yeah, which is kind of nice. And Eldegoss is good for just recycling. I'm going a little bit cheeky on the boss count, hoping that Rope can do some heavy lifting here, hoping that Weakness just hitting through the active is going to be a decent option for like 1 or 2 of your turns in games, but also having Goss for boss is never a bad play. Goss for Raihan is also a play that you make fairly frequently, especially with Moltres V coming out of nowhere, where you can have 0 energy in play at the time, and you can go Direflame Wings, attach Raihan, which is really nice, or you can, you know, also do the base and E-switch plays as well, and Raihan can enable that package and make things happen for you. So yeah, very, very solid card in general. I really like it as sort of a finisher in this deck, to make sure you have your steady stream of attackers. And outside of that, that's where all the creativity comes, really. It's all in the Pokemon. The rest is just switch outs to helping you get into Entei early and move in between your Mew, which is just a great Pokemon to shove into the active position at the start of your turn, to gain additional value and dig into some of these outs, which are pretty handy throughout the entire game. And yeah, there's the small headache of drawing the wrong energy at like the wrong time sort of thing, and it's kind of important to find the double dark energy. I think if I was going up counts of any of these energy, the first thing I'd look for is the dark, because you want to find 2 darks fairly early on, so you can Dire Flame like over multiple turns and have like the Raihan option as well. But overall, it's not been too detrimental, especially when you get that Mew online looking for these searches. Because you thin the deck so naturally with Crobat and Research in those opening turns, your deck actually gets pretty thin fairly quickly, which is always a nice thing. Let's talk about some other options then, because we could go even more toolboxy if we wanted to. We could go full Aurora, and I know there will be people looking at Aurora box style decks. I think naturally when you're looking at Moltres and Entei, you want to have basic energy because of Basin and Direflame, but if you want to tech out your toolbox in a different way perhaps, you could definitely think about Vikavolt V. I think Paralyzing Bolt is really, really powerful into other one prize matchups. Which we haven't really had to deal with for a long time, but now that we have bench protection again from this Manaphy actually, which I'll talk about in a moment, it can be really nice for slowing down some of these more setup-based one-prize engines, which could be pretty important, and it also gives you some help against Suicune as well, which is one of your sort of more awkward Pokemon to come up against, not just because they're hitting your Entei for weakness, but because you're naturally filling your board wide because of your own Entei. So Suicune is knocking out all of your 2-prize Pokemon pretty convincingly. Zamazenta V, actually like a decent late game burst attacker, but is a full 3 energy requirement, one of them being metal, which is pretty awkward. You'd have to be playing Auroras, and you'd have to try and weave in like a Raihan attach play, as well as like E-switching as well, so you'd want additional E-switches in your deck if you wanted to have the Zamazenta. The big upside is it could really improve your matchup against Ice Rider, which I think is very poor right now, outside of possibly the Arceus Ice Rider builds, where maybe there's enough like other 2 prizes just floating around on the board that you can still win just by racing and using the likes of Zapdos to knock out their V-Star, using Boss's Orders on the likes of Crobats, or just Ice Rider Vs before they V-Max. That could still be valid for you. Ninetales is interesting, again, has that 3 energy attack cost, so it's a little bit more expensive, and you'd probably want to go up to at least 2 E-switch if you were going to play the Ninetales. But at least you can do the Basin Raihan play with Ninetales, which is kind of nice, a little bit better than the Zamazenta. And you can copy some interesting attacks. I think actually pretty nice if there are still some spreading decks in the meta, like against Rapid Strike. This could be a big deal, and it could be like as good as just teching in your own Manaphy, honestly. Where you can set up the Urshifu for a KO with one of your other attackers, whilst also knocking out like a single prize Pokemon, which then would open up your prize map, especially if you've been the one to get the first, like 2 prize KO with the likes of Entei or whatnot. That could go very nicely for you. If you are going more toolboxy, Ditto is always an option. Maybe stripping down, the Zapdos to a 1 count, adding in the Ditto, adding in a Ninetales, then it's only 1 space that you're squeezing in, rather than multiple. So yeah, Ditto is always a good space cheater if you are trying to add some additional techs. If you're not really convinced by the Zapdos, and if you're expecting the likes of Dunsparce to go into some of these Arceus builds, you could go down a Lightning route as your 3rd energy and have a really powerful single prize attacking Pokemon in Amazing Rare Reshiram. And again, you can do the Basin Raihan plays to get a Reshiram powered up out of nowhere. And 270 is a decent baseline of damage. Obviously very good into V-Stars if you are already playing Zigzagoon and Choice Belts. You can knock those out pretty comfortably, and is reaching on some V-Maxes as well, especially if you are adding in more Zig and more Net if you really wanted to. So a kind of interesting card there. I find it's not like super powerful, and it's really awkward when your opponent gusts around the Reshiram, because then you're sort of doing like a double down situation where you're knocking yourself out with Amazing Blaze if you have to use it a second time. So it's a little bit awkward here and there if your opponent just chooses to ignore it after it gets a little bit of value in there. And then there's really the question mark of, are there other ways that you can adapt this engine? And I think definitely that is the case. I've tried it out with the 2-tuber barrel, which is interesting. I think Cincino will eat up a lot of room, but we've seen the likes of the Galarian Fetch deck that's recently popped up, pre-Brilliant Stars actually, has taken advantage of a Cincino kind of build, and we get a better Mincino in the next set, so I'm excited to test out that engine a lot more in the new set. I could see it coming to fruition that it just makes sense, gives us extra discards energy throughout the game, gives us additional draws to help make some of these more awkward supporters to play like Raihan just much more reasonable. The barrel is kind of like just a few more dips with his ability compared to a Crobat. So that's always nice. Manaphy, if you're scared about some spreading decks still being in the formats. Obviously, we have Zapdos that can help out against Jolteon. So really, it's if you're worried about Urshifu. That's why it's not on the list right now. Because Urshifu is contending with Mew and other stuff, obviously. And other decks playing Manaphy. And then there's also the option to have Oranguru Rotom Phone. Now, I have tried a little bit with this as well. The idea being that Magma Basin is not a searchable card via anything in the deck, whereas Rotom Phone is targetable via the Mew, and then you can Rotom Phone and either Primate Wisdom or you can Fleet-Footed. The problem with it being a Fleet-Footed is that the Entei has to be in the active, then you have to get it back in and out if you're looking for exactly Basin. But Rotom Phone can be useful in other like niche situations when you are just going for that Fleet-Footed to sort of end your turn. You could end up Rotom Phoning into like boss's orders or other key things, and Wisdom, of course, can help protect certain cards as well. If you're looking to protect boss, protect Raihan for the like Marnie proofing, it can always be pretty nice. Or if you're just planning to play a research that turn, you can dig deeper into the deck and not have that huge concern. Even just the low counts of Pokemon that you're playing, you could protect those that little bit easier. So Guru Phone is something I've tried out. I would only really play like 1 or 2 phones. I wouldn't go full heavy on that engine. But it would make your Mew even more versatile than it is right now, which I think is a concept that I'm kind of into. Let's talk about the sort of matchup spread of this toolbox. And naturally, when you are trying to be a toolbox, you're trying to adapt to the meta and have good matchups sort of across the board. So it's no doubt that you're going to at least be going toe-to-toe against Genesect Mew. And you do have the outs here to, you know, KO a regular Mew V or a Genesect very easily with Entei. You know, you hit for weakness on Genesect, so they, you know, it's all down to your own bench if you can just reach a KO if it's been left active. Mew as well only has 180 hit points, so if they've, you know, gone wide on the openings, it's going to be very detrimental for them. You also have the Zapdos play that can knock out both of these V Pokemon at the same time. Even if they've left Meloetta active, you can either go for a Moltres play early to do that 90 damage attack, or you can go for those rope plays and dig deep into the deck to try and find those. You have Crobat Research and Mew Digs just to find that 2 of, so it's actually fairly reliable and is pretty strong. Against the Arceus deck, I think you come out the gates a lot faster, usually, especially Dark Arceus doesn't have much tempo turn 1, because they're pretty much just going to Trinity Charge or just, you know, attach pass sort of thing. You can be the one coming out the blocks that little bit faster. You hit for a key weakness in Arceus, of course, with your Zapdos. And even if the opponent is trying to like soft play around it, you can do some E-switch plays, which I think is cool and is a reason for us to try and go higher on the E-switch count actually in this deck. And essentially you're just trying to take the first 2 prizes and carry on that chain, and that should be one of your more favored matchups. I put Suicune Ludi as like kind of an even matchup because you're still mostly just fighting 2-prizer into 2-prizer. You always have that option to take the first 1-prize KO early on with that Moltres. It's not always easy for Suicune to be able to use that boss's orders play, especially on turn 2 when they're normally focused on developing their own bench. And sometimes they're forced to Melanie turn 2 anyway. So sometimes you can get away with that easy 1-prize knockout. And then they do a 1-for-1, and then you're still 1 attack ahead in the race, which I think is pretty reasonable for you overall. So I don't think it's too shabby. Potentially, things could get a little bit awkward if they are using their quick shooting pings on Mew, but you again have the net to try and remove that from play as an option for them. So something to bear in mind there. Single strike should be fine. I think you'd be very strong into the Gengar matchup just because of Zapdos. I think the Umbreon Urshifu would be a closer matchup. You don't hit for grass weakness in this deck, so the Umbreon would probably be the most difficult thing to get around. You also don't hit for weakness on the Urshifu, but it's harder for them to chain 1 blows, so I would imagine they're going to use a mixture of 2 prizes and try and make Umbreon VMAX against you here and there. But again, tempo's on your side a lot of the time. Sometimes the Umbreon builds can just crumble under the early game pressure of you doing like a escape rope play turn 1, and even just knocking out Houndour turn 1 can be backbreaking for them. From what I've seen so far from my single strike builds, it really enjoys playing Crobat itself, which makes Zapdos a much bigger threat early on. And you have Choice Belt Zigzagoon in here as well, so you can hit the 200 on the Umbreon pretty easily, or you can set up the Urshifu so that they can't single strike Raw onto themselves unless they VMAX. Both those are really good outcomes for you, so I think that should be a decent race. Arceus V-Star Duraludon, again, they're low tempo pressure. The deck is entirely basic energy. I think your biggest issues are going to be like the healing plays that Duraludon can do against you with Hyper Potions, but that's not like a massive deal, I don't think. Again, you have Zapdos one-shot pressure against the Arceus. They're basically never going to play Dunsparce because it makes your prize map even easier for you. So it doesn't make any sense for Arceus to cover itself that way, so Zapdos can always get some value there. And then it's just trying to get through the Duraludon before it pulverizes through all your board. At the very least, you can try and do the Entei play where you don't damage yourself with Basin and attack as a 230 hit point Mon. That can be really annoying if they are going for early Trinity Nova pressure for certain. So that's pretty important. Some of the worst matchups, Rapid Strike Malamar. Obviously, it's a 1-prize deck. We are damaging ourselves as 2 prizes, so it's a pretty easy threshold for them to take KOs with. We don't really do much in that instance. And Ice Rider is also going to be awkward, where they just have a huge amount of hit points. Again, we're damaging ourselves, so even Rider the High King can sometimes take KOs. They're not forced into Max Lance all the time. And I think it's just going to be an awkward race for us in that instance, unless we really pop off early with aggression and like rope plays and whatnot. To initiate a race, but I think in general it should be unfavored for us because we aren't hitting that boy for one-shots anytime soon. And then there's a Surfetched Moltres deck, similar to what I was saying with Suicune, where these are all much of a muchness, where yes, the opponent can try and put you onto the odd prize race, but if you're going on to odd prizes, you're going to do it with your own Moltres and force them to have boss here and there. And yes, the Surfetched deck is digging a ton with Cincino the entire time, but they're also going to be slower out the gates. And they too are a combo deck that's trying to find a ton of energy if they're going to use their Galarian Moltres and Zapdos effectively to get that Surfetch rolling. And oftentimes they actually just sit there behind Lax and give away like multiple prize cards. And if you are just going to be coming out the blocks quickly and racing, you don't give them enough time to have that big catch up, especially if you are just taking 1 prize at a time with Moltres and forcing a ton out of them, where they're getting like enough fighting energy into play for then the Surfetch to come down with a boss play. You know, it's only good if they've done that by like turn 2, which is a ton of pressure for them. So I think he should be okay there as well. So overall, just a couple dodgy matchups from what we're expecting to be some of the top decks in the format. Obviously, it's still early. Obviously, this sort of top deck range could go even wider. We didn't talk about Jolteon, which has previously been like the second best deck in the game and is probably in decline, but may still be around. Again, we don't have many things for that outside of Zapdos. There's Urshifu, which would be probably one of our worst matchups. There's potential Togekiss decks. There's lots of things in here that could also make the matchup spread chart, but we're just trying to give you a quick overview. Then on to the closing thoughts then. I think this archetype is going to be pretty interesting, and I think there'll be a number of decks ultimately trying to just herd hit for ×2 weakness with sort of the best and most efficient 2 prizes available, and even some 1-prize Pokemon like Galarian Moltres, just the single prizer with Malevolent Charge. So I think those are going to be pretty commonplace because there's not many better ways to beat Mew in this format. It's just so ruthlessly fast and efficient. Some of the best ways that you can try and catch up is simply to uptrade on the VMAX and make the most out of that. So yeah, it feels like it's going to be 10 a penny, where there's going to be a lot of these different builds. What I will say is Entei should be very strong at fighting these fights as long as you're coming into other builds that are also playing Lumineon, Crobat, and multiple 2-prize Pokemon. I think you should be very good and pretty confident that you can race the majority of these archetypes and at least go toe-to-toe with them. And you have decent draw in the opening to try and shove your 1-prize active if you're the player going first. So I think that's all good for you, really, all pretty good news. The one thing I'd say is this deck doesn't really have a leg to stand on against single prizes, and that could be an issue, seeing as though we're expecting at least Malamar to be up there in the top sort of 10 decks easily. So I'm expecting that to be a presence, and right now that's something outside of the range and the scope of this Entei box. So a lot of talking today, that's kind of natural. It's the first one that we've talked about in Brilliant Stars outside of all of those Arceus decks that I've already mentioned on the channel, so do check out the Arceus builds if you're interested in some of those. Do also check out the tier list if you want to see our full thoughts and our breakdown of where we sort of place everything in the meta. But yeah, this was an interesting take on Entei, one of my favorite cards from the set. So let me know what you guys think about this, and what other type coverage toolboxes are you scheming for this format to try and tackle the likes of Arceus, the likes of Mew, and the likes of Single Strike. I'll hear it all down below. Hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.